Thank you. Please. You've already had a long day, and for you mayors, governors, state legislators, there's an old saw that they always use in my favorite town other than Wilmington, Delaware, Philadelphia, which is sort of a suburb of Delaware. And W.C. Fields said, one night I spent a week in Philadelphia. One day you spent a week in Washington. I don't want to extend that week too much further, but Gov, thank you. You've been remarkable. You and O'Malley have done incredible things, as Hickenlooper and others. You've taken some real chances. You've taken some real hits, but you've made real progress. And a lot of you mayors have done the same, and we have members of Congress here who have been steadfast in trying to get done what the President and I feel so strongly about, as they do as well. You know, I don't have to tell you, I'm not going to go through what they prepared for me here, which is good. But the bottom line here is that we know that gun violence is ravaging our communities. I mean, this is not, of all the civilized countries in the world, this is an exception. It doesn't have to be this way. There is no reason for it to be this way. And you know, we always extend our prayers and sympathies for those who are victims of gun violence. You know, there's horrible, horrible, horrible events like Sandy Hook. I spent a lot of time up there. I still keep in touch, Gov, with at least 10 or 12 of those parents, I mean, on a fairly regular basis. Because a lot of them are still fighting very hard for the kind of rational changes. But, you know, in any street corner in some of the bigger cities in America, you know, in a month, there's equally that many people, you know, shot dead, and a number of bystanders that are badly injured and or killed. And, you know, and how many children, it's not as large, who pick up a gun that is doesn't have a trigger lock on it, or is not safely stored, and you know, blows their own brains out, or the kid next door. And the frustrating part for me is, and I'll be blunt with you, I mean, I'm the guy who did the first real serious gun bill in the last 40 years. I mean, I actually sat down. No, I don't say it for that reason. I don't say it for that reason. I really don't. It's not like I did this. I don't mean it that way. But it took a hell of a long time. It passed in the 94 cycle, 93 cycle, but I started writing this legislation as chairman of the Judiciary Committee back in the early 80s. And I'm so damn old, I got here right after all the fights on, quote, gun control after the assassination of President Kennedy. I got here in '72. And you had guys like Joe Clark, senator in Pennsylvania, and Tidings in Maryland, great senators who lost on the gun issue, on, quote, gun control back in the 70s, in the 60s. And so this is a perennial fight that's been going on in the United States of America for a long time. But one of the things that I've learned in the effort that ultimately succeeded, and I have to admit to you, were it not the overall crime bill and had $30 billion in it to help localities, I'm not so sure we could have gotten some of what we got done on the rational gun policy side. So we're all pros here. I'm not trying to sell you a bill of goods that this is an easy thing to do. But it took a long time. And so I'd like to start off by saying to you all that we don't think this is the end of the process. And a lot of people keep saying, why are we still pushing the Congress? You know you're not going to get anything done. Well, I was a legislator for 36 years in the Senate. and I'm going to say something outrageous, I was a fairly successful legislator. I got a lot of stuff passed. And I don't know anything that is difficult that comes quickly. The only example I can give you in my entire career is what the president did on the Affordable Care Act. That was a bit of an epiphany that happened as rapidly as it did. But most of this stuff takes a whole lot of time. And the reason I say this is that after Newtown, as the governor said, the president asked me to put together a package. And it had a number of legislative recommendations, but also had, 40 recommendations relating to executive actions that the president could take. And the irony is it had overwhelming support. Overwhelming. It had the support of the healthcare community. It had support of the everyone engaged in the effort. 80% of the American people supported the proposals. 56% of homes with gun owners in the home supported the proposals. This wasn't something that was somehow that didn't immediately make sense to the average American, and overwhelmingly made sense. And as a matter of fact, what struck me in the polling data was the significant number of people thought we already had laws like that. It's a little bit like, if I can make an analogy, you can go have a same-sex marriage in about 37 states and go show up at work that same day and get fired because you're gay. Most people don't know that states still allow that to happen, because don't we have, there's the constitutional right to marry whomever you wish. It's the same kind of thing when you start talking about these gun issues. And so one of the things that I want to say to you, because you've been meeting all day, is that the things we're talking about, universal background checks, supporting gun violence research for the disease, the Center for Disease Control, smart guns, all the stuff you had on the agenda, domestic violence. These are things that are, the hard part is not convincing your constituents as a whole that it makes sense. The hard part is convincing a Congress that is no, because I served there a long time. I have great respect for the House and Senate. I really do. But where we are today politically and the makeup of how we get elected, the gerrymandering that exists in the House seats, some states that are now all red or all blue, it's hard to generate consensus because both parties are worried about either the left or the right. They're not worried about the center, the rational center, as some would say. And so one of the things that we have done, the president has implemented 23 of the executive orders, and I'm not going to go through them, from increasing school resource officers, expanding mental health benefits and parity to 60 million more people so there's access, et cetera. But has come up with some pretty controversial in the minds of some executive actions that are helping. But one of the things that you talked about today, background checks. I asked, because the president has asked me to lead this effort, I asked us to go back and take a look at how well are we at the federal level doing our job to deal with, let's say, background checks. I'm the guy with Brady who actually insisted on the NICS system being set up. It was the compromise that was going to allow for instant purchase if instant background checks could occur, et cetera. And the truth is that two things happened that aren't good. One is the demand for these background checks outran the capacity for NICS system to be able to handle them. So we called for, as we went through and back and scrubbed what we were doing, we called for 261, I think it is, new employees to be able to handle these calls, to be able to move quickly. Because right now, if you go into any one of your states and you're at Dick's Sporting Goods, you want to buy a shotgun or whatever you want to buy, pick up the phone and call Nick's. If they can't get an answer in the next 24 hours, well, guess what? You can, we've extended it to 3 days, but you can go ahead and get the gun no matter what your background is. And so that's partially our fault because we've had trouble getting funding for things we care about these last 8 years. And it's clear when we wrote the legislation, the only way we could get it passed is it would sunset in 10 years. It had to be reauthorized, some of it, like the assault weapons ban. And where they were unable to do away with the legislation itself, what they were successful in doing is diminishing the funding for the agencies in charge of implementing the various pieces of legislation. But we also found out, when we go back and look, which we already knew, is a lot of your states aren't doing their part. A lot of your states are not actually reporting what they're required to report. Now, when we first drafted the law, a lot of states said it's going to cost us money to do this, so we provided seed money. We provided money to help you set up the computer systems, the mechanisms by which you'd be able to transfer the information. But it's amazing what is not reported. We recently talked to the governor of a state that is very progressive on these issues, and we pointed out that there is only one case of reported to NICS system relating to mental health. And they said, one, well, that's the only one in the whole state. Well, that's the state I'm moving to. You know, you only have one person needing mental health, work. But the point is, you guys can make a big difference back at home. You guys can make a big difference, state legislatures, mayors, et cetera, insisting that your state step up and abide by the reporting requirements that are written into the law. Now, some of your states have gone further, which is a good thing, and had your own background check system and added to the exclusionary provision, what would exclude you from being able to own a weapon. You've added additional personnel or additional categories of that. And so some states have moved on. But the generic point I want to make to you is you just had you just had a round table or a long table on background checks. There's a lot more that we can do if we just reported. If the states just reported the information that's available to them or figure out how to better aggregate that information to transfer to the NICS system. We can save lives. We can save lives. And I know, quote, the NICS system is not an anachronism that jumps to the lips of every legislator when they know exactly what it is. A lot don't. You all do. A lot don't know what it is. But it matters. It matters if you put pressure on your systems in order to make sure the information is transferred to the system. I think it's down in Virginia, and be able to get that information. So when that clerk from Dick's calls, it's on the list. If in fact they wouldn't qualify. And so we've extended the time to 3 days before you can, purchase the weapon if you get no answer back from the NICS. But this is you're going to see a lot of pressure for that to change and go back to the 24 hours unless we actually are able to get more rapid response from the system and more information in the system that gives us some reason to believe that we are getting the cadre of people who are appropriately, constitutionally able to be prohibited from owning a weapon. And now some of your states, you'll hear that there's, I think it's 3 to 5 states that have legislation saying that we can't give mental health information because it's a violation of HIPAA rules. Simply not true. The Department of Health and Human Services has put out a regulation that it is not a violation. So when you hear, if it's brought up in your legislature or it's brought up in your community, that, well, we would provide this information, we can't do it because it's a violation of the privacy rules of HIPAA. It's not true. That is simply not true. And it surprised me, but it's understandable because I'd be the same way if I was a state legislator. How many people in my own state didn't know that that wasn't true, that wasn't true? And so part of this is preaching to the choir here, getting out the information so these false assertions that the information can't be shared are debunked, and it's moved. And so, you know, there's 26 of your states. We've already received grant funding to support the gaps in reporting that exist in your state, to help you put together the system that will fill the gaps of what's not being reported. And now, the good news is, since over the past 3 years, since we started banging away at this, 70% more records are transferred to the NICS system than were before. So there's progress. There's real progress, but there's a hell of a lot further to go. And look, guys, there is going to be, and there has been, another Virginia Tech where you got a guy who, if he had just reported this information, had been reported to the NICS system, there'd be half a dozen people still alive. So it really matters. There's a lot more to say about the system and a lot more to say about the whole notion of having to register names that in fact violate the law and would not be able to own a gun, and reporting requirements, but I'm not going to take more of your time. The second issue, as you talked about, is gun safety. What we're trying to do, as you all know, and you've talked about it today, is keep guns from being able to be used by, intentionally or accidentally, by someone who is not qualified, either because they can't pass the background check or because they are a 6-year-old kid, to get access to a weapon that can be fired. It's amazing how the NRA and some gun owner organizations have become ballistic, no pun intended, with the notion that we should be looking at safe gun technology. If I can reach in my pocket and take out my cell phone and by my thumbprint access the code to activate my phone, the technology exists. The technology exists to be able to make sure that no one can, a la James Bond, can pick up a gun and fire it without it meeting the criteria that demonstrates that belongs to that person. Now, there's a lot of research going on. This is totally within our wheelhouse to be able to do this. But it's amazing the pressure that's being brought by the NRA and others not to allow this technology to go forward. There were two gun shops owners that I met with who started to advertise they were selling rifles with this technology. And they're big, Second Amendment guys. And they got so much heat from organized opposition led by the NRA, that they said, we will not sell smart guns. We will not sell smart guns. But the irony of this is, and I could go into detail with that, but you already know most of this. The irony of that is the one guarantor that your right, your Second Amendment right, will not be violated and public safety would be enhanced is if only you can fire. No one's denying the purchaser the right to purchase a gun if they meet the criteria of not being a felon, etc. Your Second Amendment rights are totally, thoroughly protected. Your Second Amendment right doesn't say I have a right to provide this weapon to my 6-year-old kid. Not that they intentionally do that. No one says you have a right to pass a background check and then hand your weapon over to somebody who you know does not meet the criteria to be able to constitutionally own a weapon in the United States and give them to them. That's not a Second Amendment right you have. And so there are a number of, I won't go into the regulations we've put in place to begin this process in the interest of time, But there's also an awful lot of philanthropists out there who are prepared to invest considerable amounts of money in doing research and development to be able to develop the capacity to have this safe gun technology cheaply available. Cheaply available. That get to the point, one expert I met with believes they can get to the point where it doesn't cost more than a trigger lock to be able to do this. That should be a goal. That should be a goal. And we should not be intimidated by the opposition who somehow views this as, and you're going to hear all kinds of arguments. You're going to hear all kinds of arguments. Where you're going to experiment with the military. You're going to make that. It's malarkey. This is totally within our wheelhouse to do this. Everyone's right being protected, including innocent bystanders' rights being protected by making sure that the gun is not transferred intentionally or unintentionally from a legitimate gun owner to an illegitimate gun owner. Earlier this year, the President directed the Departments of Justice, Homeland Security, and Defense to map out how we could deploy real-world smart gun technology. And so these agencies released a report last month that, among many things, begins the process of defining for the first time the requirements that gun manufacturers need to follow to sell smart gun technology when it appears. How gun manufacturers test smart gun technology within a safe environment at military testing centers. There's ways to protect all the interest here that are totally legitimate. And we should not be cowed from moving forward with this technology. It can be a game changer. And I understand Senator Weinberg from New Jersey has been and continues to be a leader. She continues to be a leader in her state to do more on smart guns. And I think you get to speak today, Senator, to talk to this? Well, you probably covered more than I have covered. But the bottom line is, it is a really rich environment that answers clearly two serious concerns. One, whether you all like it or not, or we like it or not, there is a Second Amendment. It's real. It exists. It exists. And it must be upheld. And two, there is a need to significantly increase or decrease the exposure to violence as a consequence of the use of a gun in American society. And this is a place that could have gigantic payoff for us, in my view. Last point, as the author of the Domestic Violence Act, I held over 1,000-hour hearings, literally. When the Supreme Court struck down one part of my bill, they acknowledged, they said, notwithstanding the Judiciary Committee held over 1,000 hours of hearings, blah, blah, blah. I didn't keep a count. They kept the count. And it's interesting what we found out. And it should be no surprise to anybody that while some women survived being brutally attacked when we were unable to find a means to intervene, those who were attacked by any weapon from a hand to a club short of a gun had a significant higher percentage of possibility of surviving, of living. And one of the things we found is the people who in fact are the ones that have stay away orders that are repeated are the ones who are the people most likely to go do damage to their spouse. They should not be able to own a gun. They should not be able to own a gun. And speaking of New Jersey, Frank Lautenberg was one of the guys who pushed hard for this to happen. Well, in America, a majority of fatal domestic violence cases are committed by use of a firearm. 52% of the women in America were murdered with guns, killed by their intimate partner. And in those states that require background checks for all handgun sales, including those are exempted, they're not allowed to purchase, those with violations of a domestic violence order or convicted of a domestic violence abuse, there's 46% fewer women are murdered by a gun by an intimate partner. Now you say, well, that adds up to maybe only a couple hundred lives. Well, guess what? One life. One life. It matters. And so it does matter if, in fact, the background check excludes, and if it's conducted, anyone who is in violation, has a stay-away order or in violation of convicted of a domestic violence offense should be denied the ability to own a gun. And so, look, there's a couple things that I've learned. Not a whole lot, but a couple of things I've learned. When the Congress is dysfunctional, and this isn't the first time, it's the worst time, I think, in modern history, short of the Civil War, that this town is as dysfunctional as it is right now. I have never seen it like this, and as was ruefully pointed out to me, there's only 13 people in the history of the United States ever served longer in the Congress or in the Senate than I have. So I've been around a while, which is frightening. But I've never seen the dysfunction as bad as it is now. That, you know, all of you are in the Congress, and you who are governors and legislators, you tend to, if you want to have real impact, you tend to focus on 2 or 3 things where you become known as a genuine expert, and where people in your own party or others look to you. That's the biggest bang for the buck. That's usually a method by which you can increase your influence in whatever legislative body you choose, or if you're an executive. And so I've spent an awful lot of my time in foreign policy, this area and foreign policy. And there's an old expression where I come from, it probably exists in your communities. An expert's anyone from out of town with a briefcase. I don't have a briefcase, but I'm considered to be somewhat of an expert in American foreign policy. Since we've been in office, because there is no power in the vice presidency at all, nor should there be, for real, it's all reflective. The only power that exists in the vice president is the degree to which people with whom you're dealing think you speak for the president. And this partnership between the president and I has worked very well, because the assignments he's given me, he gives me, I don't have to check, I just go do them. And because he has so much on his plate. And by the way, whoever the candidate's going to be, whoever the next president is, they're going to find that the nature of the office of vice president has changed markedly, not because of me or any predecessor, but because of the nature of what's on the president's plate. You need help. And so I get sent off on, because I know most foreign leaders and have known them for a long time, just because I've been around, and this has been my area. For the first time in my career dealing in foreign policy, and I've traveled over 1,150,000 miles so far just as vice president. And when I get sent to meet with heads of state, because even though the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, they all are incredibly important, no one doubts when I speak to a world leader, they know they're speaking to the president. I don't say anything that everybody doesn't know that he has signed off on. So it just cuts through a lot of things. And the last 5 years, it's the first time in my career, whether I'm sitting with President Xi of China, or I'm sitting with Erdogan in Turkey, or I'm down in Colombia, wherever I am, and I'm trying to convince a head of state to agree with a foreign policy initiative we are pushing, either multilaterally or bilaterally, and to get an agreement, and to reach across the table and you'll shake hands with that head of state. And here's the question I most often get asked after all the detail about what we're talking about has been resolved. Mr. Vice President, can you deliver? Hear me now? Can you deliver on what we're agreeing to? Because every consequential foreign policy agreement that takes place, the other side's taking a chance as well. What they're saying is, don't make me walk the limb here, out on the limb, in my constituency, my country, and take a chance on this compromise we're talking about. Because you're going to go back to Washington and the president's not going to be able to get it done because of a dysfunctional Congress. Folks, One of the things that I found, and we've had to adjust to because of the nature of the dysfunction in Congress today, is that we go back to you. You are more important in terms of national policy, than you have been in the last 50 years. Why? We can raise up an issue like we have the minimum wage. We haven't been able to get it done nationally. But because we beat the drum so much and raised the awareness of the issue, you've gotten it done. Many of you in your cities have made significant changes in the minimum wage. Many of you in your states have done the same. So that's a long way of saying to you is, just because we have not been able to get it done nationally with this Congress, it doesn't mean that you can't change a lot of these parameters of these issues at home. It matters. We're going to keep beating the drum. We're probably not going to get much more done in the next 9 months. But this is something you just got to keep at and keep at and keep at and keep at. And I think if we do our job of continuing to raise this issue up, and you are able in your job, even in localities relating to what city ordinances are, what the state, it matters. It has a cumulative impact. And like I said, look what O'Malley did, and look what the distinguished governor from Connecticut has done. It is gigantic. It's a fundamental change affecting an entire state. And this can be contagious. So I guess it's a long way of saying, don't quit on this. Don't walk out of here, out of Washington saying, well, you know, I know they're not going to get a damn thing done in the Congress between now and then, so why should I bother doing this? You can make some real changes and set the table for at least one of the next presidents of the United States to be able to get some of this done. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.